Hey everyone, Lisel Crowley here at the Cool Tool Studio. Today I'm going to show you how to use EZ960 Sterling Silver Clay to make this elegant layered cuff using a jewel stamp and a texture tile and a cubic zirconia. This is the cuff we're actually going to make, and these are some other examples of the same type of design. This one with a stone and this one without. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're making a layered textured cuff using EZ960 clay, and these are the items you're going to want to have on hand to make this project. First, you want a clay board. It's a wonderful work surface to work on. I absolutely love this. The clay doesn't stick to it. It's got feet, so it raises the surface up a little. So even if you're on an uneven surface, you have a nice level surface to work on. The Ultra Clay Pick, this is my absolute favorite needle tool in the universe. Some diamond tweezers. We're going to set a cubic zirconia in this, and these are 8mm rounds. Of course, you can do any shape or size that you want. These particular colors fire well in the EZ960, the white, the amethyst, the lavender, and the fire opal. But there are other colors that will work as well. You just want to check the firing guide on Cool Tools website to make sure that it'll work with EZ960. We're also going to use a tough card, and these are new. This is a new product. These are great for cuffs, nice and long. We're going to use EZ960 clay, and it's essential to use a sterling silver clay like EZ960 for this product because you're going to shape the cuff flat and then shape it, form the cuff flat and then shape it after firing. And the sterling clay will have the strength to handle that. This is just water. It's always good to have water available. Cool slip for lubricating your textures. This is the Cool Tools Clay Hydrator, and you are probably familiar with seeing it like this for long-term storage of your clay. But it also works well when you're working to keep your clay moist and hydrated. You just keep it upside down over your clay on a tough card like that. It gives you easy access to the clay while you're working, but it keeps it nice and moist. We're also going to use a mega texture tile. This is a lovely texture, but there are many options to work with. You definitely need a very long texture tile to get the length you need to make the cuff. We're also going to use the jewel stamp, and I'm going to use this particular one, but there are many jewel stamps to choose from, and you can mix and match the textures how you would like. This was just a basic showing you how to do the project. We need a tape measure to measure the wrist, a cutter and a scraper, a stone setting template for the 8mm stone, and again, you can use any shape or size stone that you want that fits the design. Water and brush, big roller, thickness frames, these new bezel templates that work great, smaller tough cards for the stone, and a coil roller. Okay, so the first step in creating the cuff is to set the stone because you want to create the bezel for the stone and have it dried and sanded before you actually make the cuff. So I've chosen to use this lavender 8mm CZ. It's a lovely color. It looks great in the fired silver. And we're going to use one of the bezel templates. Now, if you haven't used these are excellent for setting any kind of stone. They come in all the shapes. They come in pear, marquee, trillion, all the odd shapes, and in a variety of sizes. And they're great for making, they're calibrated to the size of the stone. They're great for making nice uniform bezels. The first thing we have to do is determine the depth of the stone. So I'm going to use the thickness frames, and this is 14 cards. And I'm going to take my coil roller and just run it over the frames. If the stone moves, it means that we are not deep enough. So let me add 4 more cards. And now we are deeper than we need to be. So let me go down to 3 and see how that works. Now, in your studio at home, you can, once you determine what depth you need for a stone, you can write that down and you don't have to go through this trial and error process every time you set a stone. Okay, so this is a good depth, because I know this is not deep enough and this is a little deeper. So that little bit of difference is actually something that you want, because the shrinkage of the clay, which is about 10%, will accommodate for that extra depth. So once you've determined the depth, you want to use a tough card or another work surface, and you want to take a nice lump of fresh clay or freshly reconstituted clay. This is EZ960 clay again. Handle it minimally with your hands. Use your coil roller to roll it into a nice smooth ball. Once you have a nice smooth ball, place it in between your frames and just press. And this creates a patty that is the perfect depth for your stone. Now we're going to take the bezel template round, and we're using, again, these are calibrated, so this is the size for the 8mm stone. So I'm going to keep my frames in place so I can use them to support my template. And I'm going to anchor the template over the clay, come in with my ultra clay pick, and I'm going to cut. And as you cut that inner circle, you just keep going around and around, and eventually the clay lifts very cleanly out. It's much better to do it that way than to just cut and try to dig the clay out. That's a very important step. And see how easily I can put my clay away while I'm working. Now, you see there's a little crumb of clay sticking up here. Typically what I'll do is I just go around once or twice in the opposite direction to try and clean that up. Now I'm going to press one more time with my coil roller, and that's because as you cut, you tend to move the clay around a bit, so this just stabilizes the clay. I'm going to take my diamond tweezers and pick up my stone and just drop it right on top of that hole. I'm not pushing it in, I'm just getting it so it's centered over the hole. Come back with my coil roller and press straight down. Because you've got the table of the stone that sticks up and is nice and flat, using the flat coil roller to press it in allows you to get that stone in perfectly level. You want the girdle of the stone, which is the widest part, to be under the surface of the clay. And the reason for that is as the piece is firing, the clay is going to shrink and grab on to the stone. If you don't have that under the surface of the clay, what it will do is squeeze the stone out. So this is very important that that girdle be under the surface of the clay. Now we're going to bring the template back in. And with each size stone, you have two bezel options, a narrower one and a wider one. I'm going to choose the narrower one. And I'm just going to center it over the stone. And I'm going to anchor it again with my fingers, needle tool straight up and down. I'm only going to go around once this time. Again, I'm leaving my guides in place, and you'll see why in a moment. I'm going to hold my finger over the stone and cut away the excess clay. The reason I hold my finger over the stone is that as you pull the clay away, sometimes it can pull on the stone, and if you anchor it with your finger, that's less likely to happen. And now one more press with my coil roller. And that gets that stone seated perfectly in there. Now I'm going to pull my guides away, and I'm going to look at it from the side and make sure I like the way it looks. If you can see, I made a little bit of a gouge when I cut away the excess clay. So I'm just going to brush over that to somewhat soften that and close that up. And you can close it up pretty well. And I also have a rough spot right here. I'm not sure why that's there. But again, I'm going to brush over that to close it up. This piece will be dried and sanded before I actually use it. So I can really use a lot of water right now to clean this up. My top is relatively smooth. I'm just going to brush a little over it with water to soften any fine cracks that are there. And so this is ready to be dried. I usually dry in a dehydrator, whatever form of drying you use. Get it perfectly dry before you sand it and then go to the next step. So now the stone has, the bezel has been dried and I'm ready to sand. And these are the tools you want to have on hand for sanding. I love these trays because you can capture all your sanding dust and then either make paste with it or put it back in with dried clay and reconstitute it into clay. You want a smoothie. I like the fine. Cool Tool sells these in a variety of grits, but I really like this fine sanding stick. A nice brush for brushing away the sanding dust. And then this is a super fine 3M sanding pad. So let's get started sanding. So here's the stone, and you can see how it looks on the back and on the front and on the side. The first thing I'm going to do is sand the back. And that I'm just going to rotate on the sanding stick. And I find even the fine sanding stick is coarse enough to do what I need it to do on these bezels. There's also a little crumb of clay there. That's not going to come out easily with sanding. I'm just going to pick that out with my clay pick. Okay? Now, if I am not a perfectionist. If I wanted that perfectly round, I could take a needle tool in there and round it out. But you're not going to really see the back of the bezel as long as there's plenty of room for the pointy part of the stone. I'm not going to worry about that not being perfectly round. But if you're a perfectionist, you can certainly work with that. Now I'm going to start sanding around the outer edge. There's two things I'm doing at this point. I'm refining the shape a bit, and I'm also smoothing away any cracks or gouges. And sometimes I'll actually sand this way because I can see better what I'm doing. And you always want to keep rotating the stone because if you sand too long in one place, you're going to flatten it. And then brush it off. So while I was sanding, I noticed this little gouge in the side of my bezel. That's a little deep to just sand away. So I'm going to show you how to fix that using a syringe. And EZ960 does come in a syringe now. When you receive the syringe, it's going to have this protective cap on it. So you want to unscrew that. And it comes with you can get 3 tips for the syringe. The blue, the green, and the sort of minty color. And those are different, there's a fine, a medium, and a wide tip. I'm going to use the fine tip because we're just filling in a gap, so I don't really need it to be any thicker. And what I love about this is you can screw that on so you've got a really good connection of your tip to your syringe. Now the proper way to hold your syringe is in your fist, and I'm going to put my 2 fingers around this sort of ridge here for a stable grip, and you put your thumb on the plunger. This gives you a very stable way to control the syringe as you're using it. When you first start to use it, you want to lightly squeeze, and you'll see the clay travel down to the tip. Once you have your tip on and your clay squeezed down to the tip, you want to store it in water, and that will keep the tip from drying out. So let's use the syringe to fix this piece now. The first thing I'm going to do is dampen right in the area where I want the syringe to go. These water cups are fantastic because it gives you a natural brush holder. I'm going to take my syringe out and dab it on some paper towel because I don't want excess water getting on my piece. And now I'm just going to squeeze some syringe into that crack. And I can be messy. You don't have to try to be neat. And think of it like caulking something, caulking a gap. Once I get that squeezed in, I'm going to take my damp brush and pat that in. Okay, I want to really fill that crack and then just do a light smoothing with my brush. Now, this will have to go back in the dehydrator to be dried, and then I'll do a final sanding. So here's the stone, and this is where I put the syringe, and it's all good and dry now. So I'm just going to quickly smooth over that with my sanding stick. And this will smooth it much faster than if I had just had to sand the whole thing. Once I get the shape basically where I want it, then I'm going to take a softer sanding sponge, and this is a super fine 3M sanding sponge. And I'm just going to sand all the way around one more time. And the reason I like to do this is that the sponge follows the curve of the stone. So it won't look, it'll be a smoother curve this way. And I'm just going to go all the way around. And then finally, I'm going to do a light sanding over the top. And the sanding sponge will not hurt the stone. I get that question often from my students. If you had a diamond grit sanding pad, I would not do this. But for a regular sanding pad, you should be fine. And finally, I'm going to brush away all the sanding dust, front and back. And there's our bezel ready to go. Okay, so when you're ready to make your cuff, you want to know how long to make it. And you need to know how long to make it so it's going to be the right size after firing to be able to get on and off your wrist. EZ960 clay shrinks about 10%. So I find that if I measure my wrist right where I want to wear my cuff, and I get 6 3/4 inches here, if I pull it tight. So I'm going to say 7 inches because I don't want it too super tight. After shrinkage, that 7 inches will give me the right size so I have the gap that you need to get the cuff off and on. So I'm going to work on a 7-inch length. And Cool Tools has created these bezel templates. This is a tapered one, and this is a rectangular one. And they have 3 options on the template, 6.5, 7, and 7.5. So if you have a smaller wrist, you might want to use the 6.5-inch one. If you have the wrist like mine, 7, and if you have a larger wrist, 7.5. With these 3 sizes, you can size pretty much most adult women, unless someone has a super, super tiny wrist. So we're going to use the tapered 7-inch template. And we're going to work on this tough card, and you see it's long enough to accommodate the metal clay once I have it cut out. We're also going to work with this mega texture tile. Cool Tools has a whole new selection of mega texture tiles and beautiful, beautiful designs. And any of them would work. I just happen to like this one a lot, and so that's what we're going to use today. The first thing you want to do is lube really well. And I like the Cool Slip. It's my favorite lube, especially for textures. So I'm going to spray generously over the entire surface. Some students want to just lube right where they're going to roll, but my theory is you never know where your clay is going to end up. So you want to lube the entire surface. And I like to brush that lube into the nooks and crannies, or rub that lube into the nooks and crannies. I prefer to just use my fingers. Some people like to use a soft toothbrush. So I'm getting that in all the nooks and crannies. So now we're going to roll out the base of the cup. We're going to texture it. I've lubed my texture, and I'm going to roll a coil of clay. And I'm using quite a bit of clay. I always use more clay than I need. It's much better to have more than you need than not have enough and have to redo. So the first thing I'm going to do is roll a fat coil. And this just makes it easier to roll a long, narrow strip than starting from a lump of clay. Once I get it rolled to about 3 or 4 inches, I'm going to slightly flatten it with my coil roller. And I want to get some good width there, so I'm rocking the coil roller. That looks nice and deep. And now I'm going to roll to 6 cards thick. So on one side I have my 6-card frame, and on the other side I have the 4 and the 2. When I roll, I start in the middle, and I roll in one direction, and then I go back to the middle, and roll in the other direction. Okay, and that gives me a long narrow strip. Now this is clearly not 7 inches, but I should gain length when I texture. Now I'm going to take the texture out, and this is such a lovely texture. It's a very fine line, but it's beautiful. I'm going to lay my clay on, and I'm going to roll down to 4 cards. And with the extra clay that goes into the texture, I should roughly have a 5-card thick cuff, and that's a good thickness, I feel, for cuffs. I'm going to start in the center and roll in one direction, and you want to use firm, even pressure all the way down. Then I'm going to move my guides up, start back in the middle, and roll up. Nice firm pressure. So now that it's textured, you can see it's a beautiful fine line texture. I really like using a fine line texture on this so that the motif that I put on top shows up more. I'm going to take this long strip of clay and place it on my tough card, somewhat centered. And I'm going to take this bezel template, and I'm going to use the 7-inch selection, and I'm going to line it up where I like the design. Now it's a little tricky cutting these long ones. I do them half and half. So I'm going to anchor this in the middle. I'm using my ultra clay pick, and I'm cutting one side. Get that round edge. And then I'm going to anchor it on the end and finish cutting. Okay. Pull away my excess clay. Now some of this will be cleaned up with sanding on the edge, but I'm going to reclaim all my clay. Now I'm going to set this aside and make the center motif using a jewel stamp. Okay, so now we're going to use the jewel stamp to make the central motif. And there's a lot of wonderful options in here, but I particularly like this one, so that's the one we're going to use. So to use a jewel stamp, you want to take it off the backing that it comes on. And you can use one of these coil rollers and just attach it to it. Just press it down and it will stick, okay? The other thing you want to do is lube it. And I typically will spray a little lube on the corner of my work surface, take my finger and rub the lube in. I'm going to roll the clay out 3 cards thick. And the reason for that is that I don't want too thick a piece to go on the cuff because it will make it hard to bend. I'm just going to roll it out. And I like to flip it over and roll it again so I have a nice smooth surface, but I also want to make sure it's going to release well from the work surface. If your clay tends to stick like this clay is sticking, what you want to do is scrape it up, take a little bit of lube, and just rub it on your work surface. And watch how easily it's going to release now. Using the same exact clay, I'm going to roll it out. And you see it releases perfectly well. Okay? I am now going to take my jewel stamp, which has already been lubricated. I'm just turning it to the side. I don't use cards or anything for this. I just do it visually. I'm going to press straight down and very slightly rock so I get a good impression all the way around. And you can see that lovely design that it makes. Now I'm just going to cut out around that design, leaving a little bit of edge using the clay pick. And I'm doing this by eye. If the edge isn't perfect, You can fix some of that with sanding. But I am not a perfectionist on something like this. I don't mind if something is a little bit imperfect because that shows the hand. Shows that it's not manufactured. So we'll cut away the excess clay. And now I'm going to attach this to my cuff. And I'm going to wet the back of it with water, just with water. And you want to be generous with the water. Flip it over, and it should slide if you put enough water on it. If it doesn't slide, you need to put more water. Because if you go to move it and it's not slippery, you're going to squash it. That's a technical term. So let's get this on here. And now it's going to slide a little bit. And I'll get it positioned. Now I'm centering it by eye. You can take your measuring tape and see if it's centered, and it is. It's right at 3.5 inches. So I've got it centered. Not centered, but centered. And the next thing I'm going to do is set my stone. So I'm going to place my stone right in the middle and press. And that gives me an impression of where I need to cut. I'm going to cut around that. And I'm cutting through both levels, the top and the bottom. I'm going to wet around the outside of the stone. And it looks a little messy at this stage, but that all can be cleaned up after it's dry. I'm going to set that stone right in there. And this way the stone is set into the cuff rather than just sitting on top of it. And having it set in gives a better profile when you're wearing the cuff so that the stone doesn't stick up too high. So I'm just going to adjust that point there. And that's ready now to be dried, and then it'll be sanded, and then it will be ready to fire. Okay, so here's the bracelet. It's been dried, and I'm ready to sand, but I've noticed that where where I push the stone in, I've got a little bit of a gap on this side, and there's also a tiny bit of a gap on this side. So I want to clean those up with a little syringe before I actually sand. So I'm just going to moisten and take my syringe with the fine tip on it. And I'm going to just squeeze a little bit in there. I'll do one side at a time. And I'll push that syringe down into that gap. Now some of that gap will go away with the shrinkage, but I don't want to take a chance on it showing after the piece is fired. I just want to make sure that's nicely filled in. And as long as I smooth it away and that the piece is already dry, I'm not going to lose the image. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the back. I'm going to moisten, fill it in with syringe. And this fine tip is excellent for repair work. Smooth that over. And I'm just going to brush over this area. I'm not going to fill it in with syringe, but I just want to smooth it a little with my brush. This will go back in the dehydrator for like 5 minutes, and then it'll be ready to sand. You can see how that gap has been filled in. I'm going to very lightly sand over that to smooth it. I like to feel with my finger. If it feels smooth to my finger, it's going to feel smooth on your wrist. And then I'm going to sand the whole thing around the edges. And you always want to curve that edge. You want to rotate your sanding pad so you're sort of beveling the edge so it's not a sharp edge. And then I'm going to fine tune this motif by sanding around the edge of that. So complete your sanding and then it'll be ready to fire. Okay, so this piece has been completely sanded. I've sanded around the edge, the back, and I've also sanded around that center motif. And now I'm just going to clean my stone off with alcohol, and this is really important. If there's any silver left on the surface of the stone, it will create a haze and it will dull the stone. So I'm cleaning it off front and back, and now it's ready to go in the kiln. Okay, so here you see our piece that's been fired. And the next step is to brush it, shape it, and polish it. Now I prefer to brush it when it's flat because it's just easier to do. But I have found with some of my students that they brush so hard that it starts to work hard in the metal and then it becomes harder to bend. So if you tend to be really aggressive with the brush, I would say shape it first, then brush it. But I just do a light brushing and that's enough for me. See, I'm just very quickly brushing, and I'm using a steel brush. You can also use brass. If you use brass, it's better to use soap and water. I'm going to very quickly brush the back. And now I'm going to shape it on the mandrel. And I prefer an oval mandrel. I like wood. Now, what's happening here is that we've got an area where it's thicker, where the top piece is, that meets an area that's thinner. That is the first part that you want to bend because you don't want to have a weak spot there. So I'm going to center the bracelet on the mandrel and anchor it and just start to hammer right at that point so I can bend the two layers together. And I'll flip it around and do the same thing with the other side. And you want to like hold it tightly and just get that bent. Once you do that, you should be able to do some of it with your fingers. Okay. And then I usually will flip it around and hammer it on this side to just fine tune the shape. So this is all shaped and ready to go. The next step, I like to tumble my pieces, then I add a patina, and then I do a final finishing. And after that, the piece will look somewhat like this, except that this has a different texture on the back. So here we have the finished cuff. You can see that beautiful, delicate texture that's on the background. The cubic zirconia sparkles nicely, and that jewel stamp makes a wonderful central motif on the cuff. It looks lovely on the wrist and off.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.